A year-old company, one that has never once built a battery for a car in its entire life, is handed a document 800 pages long, written entirely in German, demanding a level of quality it has absolutely no idea how to reach. Everyone would completely understand if it simply walked away. Instead, it says yes. And that single decision to take on a customer it could not yet possibly satisfy went on to turn it into the invisible engine sitting inside roughly 1 out of every 3 electric cars on Earth. This is the story of CATL. Here is the pattern worth learning. Call it the impossible first customer. When you are just starting out, every instinct screams at you to find the easiest possible client, someone you can comfortably satisfy today. But the rare and the far wiser move is to go and chase the very hardest one, a customer whose standards are far beyond anything you can currently reach. Because being forced to meet an impossible demand builds a level of quality into you that then becomes a credential no amount of marketing money could ever buy. So travel to China to the year 2011. A young company was quietly spun out of a maker of small batteries for phones and gadgets in a modest coastal city. Its founders had never ever mass-produced a battery for a car in their lives, and yet they were betting the entire venture on electric vehicles, a market that, back in those days, barely even existed at all. And then, when it was still barely a year old, this completely untested company somehow landed a deal to co-develop a battery with the famous German car maker, BMW, and BMW handed them a specification, a rule book laying out exactly how the battery had to be built. It ran to some 800 pages. It was written, from cover to cover, entirely in German, and it demanded automotive-grade standards far beyond anything that the little world of phone batteries had ever even dreamed of. And here, once again, was the fork in the road. The sensible thing, for a tiny and deeply inexperienced company, was to say that this was simply far too much. To go and find a much easier customer instead, building simpler batteries for buses or for cheap local cars, and to grow up slowly and safely. The demands buried inside that German document were, quite honestly, very close to impossible for them. But they did not walk away. Instead, they translated all 800 pages of it. And then, slowly and painfully, they set about actually meeting every single one of them. Just to satisfy that one brutally demanding customer, they were forced to build genuinely world-class quality control into their factories, right from the very beginning, long before they could ever have comfortably afforded it. That one impossible demand dragged them almost overnight all the way up to a global standard. And here is exactly why that mattered so enormously. Once they had actually passed BMW's punishing test, that achievement instantly became their calling card. Every other car maker on the entire planet took one look at that stamp of approval and quietly thought to themselves, well, if they are good enough for the Germans, then they are certainly good enough for us. The sheer ordeal that they had just barely survived had become the single most valuable credential in the whole industry. Now imagine instead that they had made the safe and sensible choice and simply turned that impossible contract down. Think carefully about what would have happened next. They would, most likely, have grown into just one more perfectly ordinary battery maker, quietly competing on price for cheap little vehicles and for city buses. The entire premium electric future would then have been captured by the long-established giants of Japan and Korea. And that trusted, neutral role of selling top-tier batteries to every single rival car maker at once would have belonged to somebody else completely. The whole empire grew, directly, out of the willingness to swallow one impossible customer. Because that is precisely what CATL went on to become. Not a car maker itself, but the great neutral supplier of the single most important part, the battery, to very nearly everybody. Rivals who fight each other absolutely viciously for customers will all, quietly, buy their cells from the very same company. By 2017, it had become the largest electric vehicle battery maker in the entire world, a title that it has now held for years and years on end. And today, roughly 1 in every 3 electric cars on the whole planet quietly runs on a CATL battery. And it certainly did not stop there. Fearing a future shortage of the rare metals that batteries so depend on, it poured huge effort into inventing brand new chemistries, like batteries built from cheap and wonderfully abundant sodium. hedging carefully against the very shortages that might one day cripple its rivals. Always that very same instinct, take on the hard problem right now, long before you are ever forced to. Look back, now, at the shape of the whole thing, a tiny and completely untested company, an impossible first customer, and a document that it could barely even read. And then the choice to accept that ordeal, rather than to dodge it and to be forged by it, almost violently, into something truly world-class. The credential that unlocked absolutely everything was not bought, it was survived. So here is the lesson worth keeping. When you are starting out on anything genuinely new, do not go seeking the easiest customer that you can possibly please. Go and seek out the very hardest one that you can barely survive. Because the impossible standard that they force upon you becomes, in the end, the reputation that quietly opens every other door. So ask yourself, honestly, is there some impossibly demanding challenge sitting right in front of you today, one you have quietly been avoiding, that might actually turn out to be the very thing that makes you